I keep replaying that morning in my mind, as if somewhere inside the memory there's a detail I missed, something small, delicate, trembling at the edge of the scene. Vermont has a way of holding silence, of letting the cold settle into your thoughts until even the simplest moments feel heavier than they should. Maybe that's why I remember every step I took toward the church, every slow beat of my heart, every breath clouding in front of me as if time itself resisted moving forward. I told myself I was only there to say goodbye to Charles, but grief does strange things to your sense of direction. The closer I got, the more unsettled I felt, as though some unseen tide was shifting beneath the surface of the morning. I didn't know why my hands shook or why the air felt thick with something unspoken. All I knew was that I wasn't walking into an ordinary funeral. Someone was waiting inside. When I first noticed the figure at the back of the room, it wasn't his face that struck me. It was the way he carried himself, as if he were standing inside a moment he didn't belong to. A man wrapped in a quiet tremor, his shoulders pulled tight with a kind of sorrow that looked older, heavier, more complicated than grief alone. I didn't recognize him, yet something in him felt painfully familiar, like a memory I couldn't quite place. I should have looked away. I should have let the day unfold the way everyone else did, simple, somber, untouched by whatever strange undercurrent whispered around him. But something held me there. His eyes were damp, unfocused, searching the room not for comfort, but for confirmation, as if he expected someone, or something, to be different. Before I knew it, he looked directly at me, not with curiosity, but with a quiet, exhausted understanding. And in that fragile second, I felt it, an ache that didn't belong to the present. An ache carried from somewhere else, somewhere farther ahead than any of us were meant to see. I didn't plan to speak to the man at the back of the room. Funerals are quiet spaces, and everyone there knew Charles in one way or another. We all shared a kind of small-town closeness that made grief feel heavier, but somehow honest. Yet when I saw the stranger again, standing slightly apart from the rest of us, something inside me tightened. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was the sense that he was carrying a weight none of us could see. After the service ended, people drifted outside to the cold light of the parking lot. I tried to follow them, but I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting him to leave quickly, quietly, the way people do when they don't want to be noticed. Instead, he stayed still for a long moment, staring at the empty front of the chapel as though the morning had betrayed him. When he finally moved, it was toward the door. I should have let him pass. I should have walked away and given him the privacy he clearly wanted. But as he stepped out beneath the low Vermont sky, I saw the look in his eyes, something between regret and disbelief. It made my breath catch. People don't look like that over someone they barely know. I followed him outside, not out of curiosity, but because grief can make you notice what others miss. And there was something about this man, something unsettled and almost fragile, that told me he hadn't come to say goodbye. He had come because he expected something else to happen, and whatever it was, it hadn't happened here. Hi, my name is Andrew. If you're enjoying this story so far, I'd be grateful if you subscribe to the channel. Have you ever felt like a moment unfolded differently than it should have? Thank you for being here with me. Now let's get back to the story. I didn't approach him right away. After the service, people lingered near their cars, talking softly, their voices disappearing into the cold Vermont air. It was the kind of morning where sound didn't travel far, as if the world was wrapped in felt. Even footsteps seemed hushed. Charles had been a quiet man in life, and somehow the day felt shaped around that same quietness now that he was gone. Silas, though I didn't know his name yet, stood by himself near a row of leafless trees at the edge of the parking lot. His coat looked worn, too thin for the weather, and he held his hands together as though trying to steady them. He didn't look like someone from here. People in towns like ours carry themselves in a certain way, shoulders firm against the cold, familiar with the rhythm of the land. But he looked unsettled, as if he hadn't fully arrived, or wasn't sure he was supposed to be standing where he was. I told myself again to leave him alone. Grief can make strangers appear meaningful when they aren't. Maybe he had known Charles quietly, privately. Maybe he had his own story, one with no place for me. But something kept me near him, even as I pretended to look for my keys or brush snow off my coat. I felt a pull. Not curiosity exactly, but recognition. The sense that whatever sadness sat on his shoulders wasn't new. It had followed him here. When he finally noticed me watching, he didn't seem startled. If anything, he looked tired of pretending he wasn't waiting for someone to speak to him. He gave a small nod, one of those greetings meant to close the distance without inviting conversation. I returned it out of politeness, but instead of walking away, I found myself stepping toward him. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said before I could speak. His voice was low, strained, as though he had rehearsed the sentence and still wasn't sure it sounded right. "Thank you," I replied. "Did you know Charles well?" He hesitated. It wasn't the pause of someone searching for the right words. It was the pause of someone debating whether to say anything at all. "I knew him," he said finally, though the words didn't sound certain. "Not in a way that makes sense to explain." I frowned slightly. People sometimes say awkward things at funerals, but this felt different. "You're not from around here," I said without thinking. "No," he answered, eyes shifting toward the chapel door. "I'm not from this place." There was something in the way he said it, "this place," that made my breath catch. People from out of town say things like this area, this town, this part of the state. But he said it as if the place itself was foreign on a level deeper than geography. A gust of wind moved through the bare branches behind him, sending a scatter of dry snow across the pavement. He closed his eyes for a second, like he was bracing against something heavier than the cold. "I didn't expect it to be today," he said quietly. I hoped I'd be here in time." "In time for what?" I asked, though the question came out more gently than I intended. He shook his head. "It doesn't matter now." But it did matter. I could see it in the way his hands tightened, the way his shoulders curled inward. His sadness wasn't the sadness of loss alone. It was the sadness of someone who believed he had failed. "You seem really upset," I said softly. "If you need a ride somewhere, or if you're waiting for someone." "No." His answer came too quickly, too firmly. Then, in a quieter voice, "I wasn't waiting for someone. I was waiting for something that should have happened differently." I didn't know how to respond to that. The cold deepened around us, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. People were leaving, engines warming, doors closing. Soon we'd be the only ones left in the lot. He looked toward the horizon, toward the pale stretch of sky above the trees, and his expression tightened with something close to disbelief, as if the world itself had betrayed him. "I tried," he whispered, almost to himself. "I really tried." The wind carried the words away before I could fully process them. But one thing was clear. Whatever brought him here wasn't simple grief. It was something else. Something heavier, something out of place in the quiet morning where Charles should have simply been remembered and mourned. And whatever it wasn't finished yet. Silas didn't walk away after that whisper. He stayed there, staring past the tree line as if searching for a clue hidden in the cold morning light. I watched him for a moment, trying to understand what kind of sadness could make a stranger stand alone at another man's funeral and speak like someone who believed he'd missed more than a chance to say goodbye. When he finally turned his eyes back to me, there was something raw in them, something I couldn't decipher but felt drawn to all the same. "I shouldn't have come," he murmured. "Not like this." "What do you mean?" I asked. He pressed his lips together for a moment, as if trying to steady himself. "I thought I'd have more time. I thought I'd arrive before it happened." There was that word again. Time. He said it the way someone might talk about a departing train or a missed appointment, but heavier, filled with regret. Every instinct in me wanted to ask what he meant, but his posture, tense, guarded, told me to move carefully. "Were you close to Charles?" I asked instead. Silas let out a breath that trembled slightly. "Close. In the ways that matter later, I suppose." He sounded older in that moment, not in age, but in experience, as if he had lived through something that had left marks no one else could see. I nodded slowly, trying to understand him. "He was a good man," I said. "Quiet, but kind." Silas swallowed hard. "I know." The answer unsettled me. He said it not as someone remembering a friend, but as someone holding a memory that hadn't yet settled into the past. Something about the way he spoke made it feel like he knew more than he should. A car door slammed somewhere behind us, startling him. His whole body tensed, not in fear, but in frustration, like someone being pulled back by a world they weren't ready to face. "You look like you're carrying more than grief," I said gently. "If there's something you need to talk about, I don't have the right to talk about it, he interrupted. Not yet, maybe not ever. That sounds like something you're trying to protect, I said. His eyes softened with a mixture of sorrow and resignation. If only it were that simple. The wind picked up again, brushing through the barren branches and carrying with it the faint smell of wood smoke from some distant chimney. Silas pulled his coat tighter, but the shiver that ran through him wasn't from the cold. Why did you come here today? I asked. If it feels this hard for you. He hesitated again, then spoke with quiet honesty. Because I believed I could make a difference. I believed that by being here at the right moment I could change what happened, but I wasn't early enough. I miscalculated. The word miscalculated hit me harder than I expected. It didn't belong to grief or sorrow. It belonged to planning, prediction, something technical, deliberate. You make it sound like you were trying to prevent something, I said. His jaw tightened. He looked down at the ground as though ashamed. I was. For a moment, the world around us felt still. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting for an explanation he wasn't ready to give. Silas. I stopped myself. I didn't know his name yet. It slipped into my thoughts, as if whispered from someplace I couldn't quite reach. I shook my head softly. What were you trying to stop? He closed his eyes. The pain on his face was unmistakable, deep, personal, as if tied to something more than the day we were standing in. When he opened them again, his voice was barely audible. I shouldn't tell you, not yet. It's not my place to change the way you see things. Not before the moment comes. The phrase unsettled me. Before the moment comes. It wasn't how people talked. Not unless they believed events were lined up like stepping stones, fixed, inevitable, waiting to be reached. You talk like you know what's coming, I said quietly. He looked at me then, really looked, and something flickered in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or guilt. I know enough, he said. Too much, maybe, and not enough to fix what matters. His words sat heavy between us. Whatever burden he carried, it was clear it wasn't from the present. His sadness wasn't rooted in today. It came from somewhere farther down the line, a place I couldn't yet imagine. But I sensed something else too. He hadn't come here simply to mourn. He had come because he believed he was supposed to change something. And whatever that something was, he had failed. We stood there in the thinning crowd, two men bound together by a grief that only one of us seemed to fully understand. My breath formed small, fading clouds in the cold air. Silas's breath came unevenly, as though every inhale cost him something. He kept glancing toward the chapel, then toward the road, as if measuring the difference between where he should have been and where he had ended up. The last of the mourners pulled away, their engines fading into the quiet hills. Soon it was just us, the wind, and the muted crunch of melting snow under our feet. Vermont has a way of swallowing sound, and in that moment I felt as if the world had collapsed into a small circle around Silas and me, one where time moved differently, slower, heavier. You said you miscalculated, I said gently. What does that mean? He didn't answer right away. He pulled a worn leather glove from his pocket and slipped it onto one hand, then stopped halfway through putting on the second. His eyes drifted back toward the chapel doors. I thought I knew the timing, he murmured. I thought I had enough of a margin, but I wasn't early enough. I wasn't anywhere near early enough. The way he said it, so personal, so self-reproaching, made me feel an ache in my chest. You're talking like this was your responsibility. His jaw tensed. In a way, he whispered. In a way it was. I took a slow breath, trying not to push him too hard. Silas, I said carefully, though I still didn't know how I knew his name. What did you think you were going to stop? He froze. Truly froze. His shoulders stiffened. The glove slipped from his half-raised hand and fell to the ground without him noticing. He turned to me with an expression that bordered on disbelief, like a man being confronted with something impossible. How do you know my name? He asked. My chest tightened. I opened my mouth and then closed it again. The truth was, I didn't have an answer. The name had surfaced in my mind moments earlier like a memory I'd forgotten I had. I'm not sure, I admitted, feeling suddenly unsteady. It just came to me. He stared at me with a look that held both fear and recognition. It shouldn't, he whispered. Not yet. Not this early. Not this early for what? He stepped back, not in retreat, but in shock. His eyes glistened with a sorrow that wasn't rooted in mourning Charles. It was rooted in something deeper, something tied to me. I knew this moment was coming, he said, voice trembling. But not here. Not this soon. The cold wind lifted the edges of his coat, carrying with it a low, distant creak of tree limbs. I felt suddenly aware of my heartbeat, of the weight of the morning pressing in on us. Silas, I said, trying to steady myself. You're starting to scare me. What's going on? He scrubbed a hand across his face, overwhelmed. Andrew, you're not supposed to know my name yet. The way he said my name made my skin prickle. He said it like someone who had said it many times before. But not here. Not now. Have we met before? I asked, though the question felt strange the moment it left my lips. His expression broke, not with shock, but with a grief that seemed to strike him to the core. Yes, he whispered, but not for you. Not yet. A long silence stretched between us. Then he bent down, picked up the glove he had dropped, and held it tightly in both hands as though grounding himself. I shouldn't have come like this, he said. I shouldn't have tried alone. Tried what? I asked. His voice cracked. To change the day Charles died. My breath caught. The simplicity of the sentence didn't mask the weight behind it. He spoke with the certainty of someone who wasn't guessing or assuming, someone who believed, with absolute conviction, that he could have stopped what happened. Silas, that's impossible, I said softly. He shook his head, not in denial, but in grief. I know how it sounds. I know what people would think, but I didn't come here to mourn him. I came because I believed, if I arrived early enough, I could make sure today never happened. There was no tremor of delusion in his voice, no dramatic flair, just quiet, exhausted truth. And as I stood there in the cold parking lot, staring at this stranger who spoke like someone who had stepped out of a different version of the morning, I realized something unsettling. He believed every word, and a part of me, some quiet part I couldn't explain, did too. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The cold pressed in, but I barely felt it. I was too focused on the man standing in front of me, this stranger named Silas who spoke about time as if it were something he could navigate, measure, correct. Part of me wanted to back away, to remind myself that grief can distort people, that some explanations don't need to be entertained. But another part of me, something quieter and more intuitive, understood that he wasn't claiming anything for attention or sympathy. He was confessing something he carried like a wound. You think you could have stopped it? I finally asked, my voice low. His breath shuddered out of him. I didn't think I knew. I knew because I've seen what happens when you arrive early enough. I've seen what changes. But this time, he closed his eyes briefly. This time I missed it. The parking lot, now empty except for our footprints and a few scattered tire tracks, felt like a stage left behind after the actors had gone. Silence pressed in from the open fields beyond the trees. The world felt paused, as though waiting for whatever came next in our conversation. What exactly did you expect to do? I asked gently. Silas looked down at his hands, turning the glove over slowly. I don't know how to explain it in a way that will make sense. Not yet. But I didn't come here to watch the day unfold. I came because I believed I could interrupt something that shouldn't have happened. The word interrupt stood out. It didn't belong to grief. It belonged to intention. Why Charles? I asked. Why him? I can't tell you that, he said, shaking his head. Not without changing things you're not ready to have changed. A strange unease slid through me. His way of talking, gentle but firm, sad but certain, felt like someone tiptoeing around a truth with sharp edges. The truth wasn't just about Charles. It wasn't just about this morning. It was about me, though I didn't yet understand why. Silas turned toward the road, the weak winter light drawing faint shadows under his eyes. I shouldn't involve you, he murmured. Not this soon. You keep saying that, I replied. What does this soon mean? He hesitated, his breath catching for a moment. It means we aren't supposed to be having this conversation yet. Not here, not now. How would you know that? His expression softened, almost breaking. Because I've had it before, Andrew. A chill ran down my arms that had nothing to do with the cold. You're saying we've talked before? Yes, he said quietly. But not for you. Not in your lifetime. He paused. At least not in the parts of it you remember. The ground felt suddenly unstable beneath me. Something in my chest tightened. Not in fear, but in the awful, strange recognition that his words didn't feel entirely impossible. They felt like the edge of a memory I couldn't quite reach. "Silas," I said slowly, "how do you know me?" He swallowed, looking troubled. "I shouldn't say, but you already have," I whispered. His face crumpled with regret. "I didn't come here to involve you. I only came to help him, to help Charles. But now," he shook his head, overwhelmed. "Now the moment is shifting too early." "What moment?" "The moment you understand," he whispered. The cold wind swept between us, lifting loose snow around our feet. There was something heartbreaking about the way Silas stood there, shoulders slumped, like a man who had failed at something essential and irreversible. "What happens to me?" I asked. The question came out before I could stop it. Silas looked at me with the kind of sorrow that made my stomach drop. "Not today," he said quickly. "Nothing happens today. Nothing you need to fear." "That doesn't answer the question." "I know," he whispered. We stood there in the dim light of the winter morning, two men separated not by age or experience, but by time itself. Time experienced differently, unfairly, in ways I couldn't yet grasp. He drew a slow, painful breath. "I didn't expect to see you this early in the timeline." His voice softened, almost a murmur. "But I'm glad you're here, even if it complicates things." My throat tightened. "Silas, please, tell me what you came here to stop." He closed his eyes, and for a second I thought he might finally tell me. But when he opened them again, all he said was something that wasn't supposed to happen today. And though his voice was gentle, the weight of his words settled on me like frost. Quiet, heavy, and impossible to ignore. Silas didn't move after he said those words. He just stood there, looking at the barren fields, as though the answer to everything he carried was hidden somewhere in the winter landscape. I felt caught between wanting to press him for more and wanting to give him space to breathe. But something told me that if I walked away now, I might never understand what had brought him into my life, or what had brought him to Charles's last morning. "Silas," I said softly, "if you came here to prevent something, you must have known something was going to happen. You must have had a reason." He let out a breath that looked almost too heavy for his chest. "I did. I had a reason. I just didn't have the timing." "Then tell me the reason," I said. "What were you trying to stop?" He shook his head, almost defiantly. "If I tell you now, you'll start looking at the world differently. You'll start expecting things you shouldn't expect yet. And that changes the path." "The path?" I echoed. "Yes." His voice trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the effort of holding something in. "There are paths we move through without knowing they're paths, and then there are the ones we try to change. I tried to change this one." "Why Charles?" I asked again. The question felt like a thread pulling us both forward. Silas's eyes flickered with something tortured. "Because he mattered," he said, "more than he ever realized." The simplicity of the answer struck me harder than a detailed explanation might have. Sometimes the deepest truths come out stripped bare, without decoration. Charles mattered. That alone was enough to shake something in me. "But how did you know?" I asked. "How did you know today would be this?" Silas looked down, rubbing the glove between his palms as though grounding himself. "Because I've seen days like this before," he murmured. "Days that were supposed to unfold one way but slipped into another. I thought I could get ahead of it." "You mean ahead in time?" I said. He didn't answer directly, but his silence said enough. The air between us felt weighted with unspoken things. The cold seemed to cling more tightly to our clothes, as if urging us inside, away from truths neither of us were fully ready for. But neither of us moved. "I know what this sounds like," Silas said after a long stretch of quiet. "You think I'm grieving in a strange way, or that I'm confused, or that I've built some story around this morning to make the pain easier to carry. I don't think that," I said. And it was true. What I felt wasn't disbelief. It was an unnerving familiarity with something I couldn't define. He looked at me, eyes tired and red in the corners. "Then what do you think?" "I think," I said slowly, "that you're telling the truth, or at least the truth as you know it." He nodded once, but it wasn't relief that crossed his face. It was sadness. "I didn't come here to tell you anything. I didn't come to involve you. But when you said my name," he paused, swallowing. "When you said it so naturally, it means the moment has already shifted." "What moment?" I asked again. "The one where you and I meet," he said softly. "The one I thought I could avoid, for your sake." His words carried a depth of regret that felt personal, intimate, like something meant for a different day, A different version of us. Why avoid it? I whispered. He closed his eyes, gathering strength. Because knowing me changes you. It changes what you see. And once you notice certain things, you can't unsee them. The wind brushed between us, carrying a thin veil of snow across the pavement. What is it I'm supposed to see? I asked. His eyes opened, and the look in them made something inside me twist sharply. It wasn't fear, at least not in the usual sense. It was recognition, as if he was remembering something that hadn't happened yet for me. Not today, he murmured again. Today isn't about you. It was never supposed to be about you. But it feels like it is, I said. He gave a small, broken smile, the kind of smile someone gives when they know a truth they wish they didn't. That's how it starts, he whispered. The cold deepened around us, but neither of us noticed. I had the overwhelming sense that Silas had come to Vermont with one purpose, and failed. And now a second purpose, one he had desperately hoped to avoid, was beginning to unfold. Silas stepped away from the edge of the lot, pacing slowly along the thin line of snow that bordered the trees. His footsteps were uneven, as if each one carried the weight of a decision he didn't want to make. I followed a few steps behind, unsure whether he wanted space or company, but feeling that either way, leaving him alone didn't feel right. He stopped near one of the bare maples, its branches stretched like thin, dark bones against the pale Vermont sky. He rested a hand against the trunk, his shoulders rising and falling with a deep, unsteady breath. You keep saying you weren't supposed to involve me, I said cautiously. But you're talking to me now. Isn't that already involvement? Yes, he admitted, voice barely above the wind. But not by choice. The timeline shifted the moment you recognized me. That wasn't supposed to happen yet. I didn't prepare for it. Prepare for what? He let his hand fall from the tree and turned toward me, his face pale with a mixture of fear and resignation. For you to know me before you're meant to. I felt a strange pull in my chest, like a faint echo of something familiar rising up through the confusion. Silas, how would I recognize you if we've never met? He closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them again, the sadness in them had deepened. Because you will meet me, just not yet. And when you do, it will change everything, for both of us. His words struck me like cold water. I searched his face for any sign of deception, but found none. Only a man worn down by the weight of too many unsaid things. But if we're supposed to meet later, I asked quietly, why are you here now? Why today? He pressed his lips together. Because of Charles. What about him? Silas looked away, his gaze drifting toward the chapel as though imagining a version of the morning that should have unfolded differently. I thought I could reach him before the moment came. I thought I could warn him. I thought... He stopped, his voice cracking. I thought I had enough time. There was a rawness in his tone that made my throat tighten. Whatever he believed he could have done for Charles, it mattered to him deeply, maybe more than he could admit. What moment? I asked again, softer this time. He didn't respond. Instead, he knelt in the snow, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped tightly together. His breath came out in slow, uneven bursts, fogging the air in front of him. I've been early before, he murmured. I've stopped things. I've changed outcomes, but not this one. Not today. I misjudged it. I took a cautious step closer. Silas, listen. Charles passed from natural causes. There wasn't anything anyone could do. He shook his head almost violently. That's not true. Not from where I came from. The phrase where I came from hung between us like a thin layer of frost, delicate and dangerous. Before I could ask him what he meant, he spoke again, quieter, more desperate. I shouldn't have tried alone. Alone? I echoed. Who else would have helped you? Silas looked up at me with eyes that reflected more years than his face showed. You? The world seemed to tilt. Me? How could I possibly? You don't understand yet, he said, standing slowly. You're not meant to. Not until the moment arrives. But I've seen you try. I've seen you fight for people. I thought, maybe this time we could change it together. A cold ripple moved down my spine. The idea that he had seen me, seen versions of me, doing things I didn't remember felt unreal, frightening, strangely intimate. But I haven't... I know, he interrupted gently. You haven't lived those moments yet. A silence settled between us, heavy and electric. The winter air felt too thin, as if it could no longer hold all the weight of what he had said. Silas, I whispered, are you telling me you've seen my future? He didn't answer right away. He looked past me toward the empty parking lot, the chapel, the quiet road leading back into town, like he was choosing his words carefully, or perhaps choosing what not to say. Finally, he breathed out a trembling reply. I'm telling you, he said slowly, that the man you become plays a part in all of this, and I'm not sure if my being here today has helped or made things worse. Something cold and fragile settled in my chest, because in that moment I realized something with painful clarity. Silas hadn't just failed Charles. He was afraid he was failing me too. For a while, neither of us moved. The winter light had shifted, softening into the pale tone the mornings take on just before noon. The chapel behind us stood silent, its narrow windows glowing faintly from whatever candles still burned inside. And Silas, this strange, exhausted man who seemed caught between two versions of the same morning, stood with the posture of someone bracing against more than the cold. I tried to steady my thoughts. Silas, I said quietly, you're talking like you've lived through this day before. He didn't correct me. Instead, he rubbed a hand across his face, as if the effort of holding his own thoughts in order exhausted him. I've lived through its shadows, he murmured. Not this exact version, not this exact hour, but close enough to know what I missed. I stepped closer, not out of confidence, out of instinct, out of the feeling that if I didn't try to anchor him, he might drift somewhere I couldn't follow. You said you expected to see me later, I said. What does that mean? When were we supposed to meet? You wouldn't believe me, he whispered. You haven't actually given me the chance. His shoulders sank. He let out a small, brittle laugh that carried no joy. You always did say things like that. A chill ran through me. Always? He nodded slowly, staring at the ground. Later, Andrew, you're different. You're older, harder, but kinder in some ways. You listen differently in the years ahead. You see the world with a clarity you don't have yet. His voice wavered. I wasn't ready to see you like this. So early, so untouched by what's coming. What's coming? I pressed. But he only shook his head. You keep asking questions you aren't supposed to know the answers to yet, he said softly. If I tell you too much, you'll start walking toward things instead of away from them. That's how timelines break. Timelines. The word struck me again. Not metaphorical, not poetic. Literal. He spoke like a man referencing something as real as geography. Silas, I need you to understand something, I said, steadying my voice. Charles was a good man, but he lived a quiet life, a simple one. Whatever you think you could have prevented, there wasn't anything here worth rewriting history for. For the first time, a flicker of frustration crossed his face, not at me, but at the limits of what he was allowed to say. You're wrong, he whispered. Quiet lives matter more than you think. The smallest moments, the smallest choices. Sometimes they're the hinges everything turns on. The way he said it made something inside my chest tighten. I looked at him more closely, trying to see past the exhaustion, past the confusion, past the desperate regret that seemed woven into his every breath. Silas, was Charles supposed to live? I asked gently. He closed his eyes, but he didn't answer. Instead, he said something far more unsettling. I wasn't here to save his life, he murmured. I was here to save what his life prevents later. My breath caught. Prevents? Prevents what? His eyes met mine, and in them I saw a depth of years, a familiarity, an ache, an understanding that felt impossibly intimate. You won't understand until you live through it, he said softly. Until you meet me the way I'm supposed to meet you. A long silence stretched between us, held in place by the cold air and the weight of what he wasn't saying. Finally, he looked toward the narrow road leading out of the church lot. The light fell across his face in a way that made him look both older and younger, like he belonged to several times at once. I shouldn't stay, he said. Every minute after the missed moment pulls things out of alignment. What does that mean? I asked. He took a slow breath. It means the version of me you know later wouldn't have stayed this long. I'm already changing things by standing here with you. I stepped forward. But you're here now. You're talking to me now. Doesn't that mean something? He looked at me with a grief so sharp I felt it physically. Yes, he whispered. It means I've already failed once. Failed who? You, he said, barely audible. The quiet around us deepened until the world felt impossibly still. Silas wasn't just haunted by the morning we stood in. He was haunted by something that hadn't happened yet for me, but already had for him. And for the first time, I realized the truth he'd been circling around since the moment we met. Silas hadn't just come here for Charles. He had come here because of me. Silas didn't try to walk away again, but something in him shifted, as though a door inside him had opened, letting in a draft he had spent a long time trying to keep out. His eyes were fixed on the narrow road beyond the lot, but his mind was somewhere else entirely, somewhere farther ahead than I could imagine. "I wish you didn't have to look at me this way," he said quietly. "Not before you know the whole story." "I'm trying to understand," I replied, "but you're not giving me much to work with." "That's because anything I say becomes a stone dropped into water. The ripples spread. They always spread." He exhaled shakily. "I used to be better at measuring them." "Measuring what?" I asked. "How far a moment can bend," he answered, almost to himself. "How long it takes for something small to change everything." The air felt suddenly sharper, colder. His words weren't dramatic. They were exhausted, almost resigned. He wasn't trying to impress me. He wasn't claiming something to sound profound. He was speaking like someone stating a fact he had lived inside. "You said you failed me," I said gently. "How could you fail someone you barely know?" Silas turned toward me then, and the look in his eyes made my breath hitch. It wasn't recognition of the present. It was recognition of a memory he carried and I didn't. "You're the one who doesn't know me," he said softly. "Not yet, but you know me." He nodded. "Yes, well enough to regret things I haven't done yet." A knot tightened inside my stomach. His phrasing, the inversion of time, the reversal of responsibility, made everything I thought I understood feel unstable. "What did I do?" I asked. He shook his head quickly. "It's not about what you do. It's about who you become." I waited, but he didn't elaborate. He glanced at the chapel again, his eyes dark with thoughts I couldn't read. "I wasn't supposed to see you this soon," he murmured. "You don't have the weight yet. You don't have the clarity." "Clarity about what?" "About Charles," he said softly. "About why today matters. About why I came." My pulse quickened. "Then help me understand." "I can't," he said, voice breaking. "Because if I tell you everything now, it won't be your choice later. You'll move toward it because of me, not because of who you are." He took a step back like he feared he'd already said too much. "You keep talking about later," I said, "but I'm here now, trying to understand you." "That's the problem," Silas whispered. "You're here, and I'm not supposed to be." The wind shifted, blowing a loose veil of snow between us. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was dense, weighted, as if the world itself was holding its breath. "Silas," I asked quietly, "why does my future matter to you?" He lowered his head, hands tightening at his sides. For the first time since meeting him, he looked genuinely afraid. Not of me, not of being believed or disbelieved, but of something tied to that question. "Because you mattered to me," he said. The phrasing made my chest pound. Past tense. Mattered. But before I could speak, he continued, voice trembling as if pulled loose from something painful. "And I can't carry your ending again," he whispered. "Not the way it happened." A chill ran through me, deeper than anything the cold Vermont air could cause. "My ending?" I repeated, trying to steady my voice. "Silas, what happens to me?" He looked at me with a grief so raw it felt like a bruise pressed by memory. "I can't tell you, not without repeating the same mistake." "What mistake?" "Thinking I could protect you by telling you the truth." I swallowed hard. "And did you?" "No," he said, barely audible. "I only pushed you further toward it." He dragged a trembling hand through his hair, overwhelmed. "I promised myself I wouldn't touch your timeline again. I promised I would stay away until the moment came naturally." His voice cracked. "But when I saw the date on my return point, I thought maybe I could do one thing right. Maybe I could save Charles and never cross paths with you again. But you failed," I said quietly. "I arrived too late," he whispered. "For him, for you, for everything." The wind curled around us, carrying a faint whistle through the trees. And in that suspended quiet, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to consider. Silas wasn't confessing because he wanted forgiveness. He was confessing because he thought he didn't deserve another chance. Silas stood there with the weight of years in his posture, his shoulders bowed as if carrying a version of the morning none of us could see. I felt the urge to reach out, to steady him, not because he seemed dangerous or unstable, but because he looked like someone who had been holding a door shut against a storm he couldn't keep out any longer. "You keep talking like all of this is already decided," I said softly, "like nothing I do can change how this day goes." He lifted his eyes toward me, and there was a tremor of something close to hope, quickly extinguished. "Every day can change," he murmured, "but not every moment. Some moments hold the others in place. And today is one of those moments?" "Yes." He swallowed. "But not the way you think." I tried to breathe slowly, keep myself grounded, keep my mind from spiraling. "Then tell me the part I'm misunderstanding." He hesitated, then stepped a little closer, lowering his voice as though the empty air might overhear him. "Andrew, what you need to understand is that I didn't come here because of one event. People think timelines hinge on big outcomes, dramatic choices. They don't. They hinge on the small ones, the ones no one notices except the person who carries them. And Charles was one of those small choices." "No," Silas said quietly. "Charles was one of the consequences." The cold seemed to thicken around us. My jaw tightened, not from fear, but from the rising sense of something just beyond reach. An explanation I almost grasped but couldn't quite hold. "What kind of consequence?" I pressed. Silas looked away, jaw tightening. "A consequence of something that hasn't happened for you yet. Something you won't understand until you're standing in the place where I first lost the thread." The phrase struck me. Lost the thread. As though his life, my life, Charles's life, had been woven together in some pattern that had frayed or snapped. "You keep talking about the future like it's already happened," I said. He let out a fragile breath. "For me, it has. But not for me. That's why I'm trying to be careful," he whispered. "You're still walking into who you'll become. I've already seen the shape of it, and it's hard not to look at you and remember the moments you haven't lived yet." A strange shiver moved through me. Not fear, but recognition, like hearing a melody you don't remember learning. "What kind of person do I become?" I asked. Silas's face softened with something close to heartbreak. "A good one. Better than you think, but not untouched, not unscarred." I swallowed. "Does that have something to do with you?" He nodded once. "And with Charles." The wind swept across the lot, scattering loose snow. The chapel door creaked softly behind us, though no one was there to open it. "Silas," I said slowly, "if I mattered to you in the future, why would you try to avoid meeting me today?" His eyes flickered, as though the question cut deeper than I intended. "Because I didn't want to pull you toward the parts of yourself you haven't grown into yet. Not before you had the strength to face them." "What parts?" I whispered. He exhaled shakily. "The parts that make you ask what your life is worth when you can't save the people you love." A silence spread between us. Not empty, but trembling, as though the air itself recognized the weight of those words. I don't even know who you are," I murmured. "But you will," he said gently. "And when you do, everything about this morning will make sense. Why I came, why I tried, why I failed." He looked down at the snow under his boots. "And why I can't tell you more." I stepped closer, unable to leave the questions alone. "If I'm so important to whatever comes next, why not prepare me? Why not tell me what I'm walking into?" He closed his eyes, and for a moment I thought he might break entirely. "Because the first time you knew," he whispered, "it destroyed you." The words hit me like a cold wave, sharp and disorienting. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. Silas opened his eyes again, and though they were rimmed with exhaustion and grief, they held something else too. Something steady, something deeply human. "I'm trying to do better this time," he said. "I just don't know if I still can." I felt the world tilt slightly, the sky pressing low, the snow settling quieter around us. And in that fragile, trembling moment, I understood something with absolute clarity. Silas hadn't come here only to save Charles. He had come here hoping, desperately, to change the version of me he had already lost. Silas backed away a few steps, as if the space between us had suddenly become dangerous. Dangerous not because of me, but because of what he might say next. His breath came out in shaky clouds, dissolving into the cold air almost as quickly as his confidence seemed to. "I didn't want to see you like this," he whispered. Not before you had lived through the years that teach you how strong you really are. The words lingered in the unmoving air, heavy with something I didn't yet understand. I felt a quiet ache forming in my chest, a strange mixture of fear and compassion. It wasn't easy to look at him, not because he frightened me, but because he looked at me with an affection shaped by memories I hadn't lived. "What did I lose?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. "If you say I became someone scarred, what caused it?" Silas shook his head quickly, but his eyes glistened. "You already feel the edges of it, even if you don't know the shape yet. Loss doesn't wait for the big moments, Andrew. It starts early, settling into the corners of your life until you don't notice how heavy you've become." The way he said my name made something inside me twist. Gentle, familiar, almost protective. "But that's not what I came to talk about," he continued, tightening his coat around himself. "I came for Charles. I came because the day he leaves this world changes something later, something that ripples forward." "Something to do with me?" I asked quietly. Silas didn't answer. He pressed his lips together as though silence itself was safer than the truth he was trying to hold back. "What does Charles have to do with my life?" I pressed. His expression flickered, not with annoyance, but with grief. "Everything touches everything else," he said. "You'd be surprised how far kindness travels, or how far regret does." That didn't answer anything, not directly, but the heaviness in his tone told me the connection was there, deep, complicated, threaded through moments neither of us had reached yet. "I still don't understand why you needed to stop today," I said. He looked up, meeting my eyes with a vulnerability that felt almost too intimate. "Because today becomes a point you return to, over and over, in ways I never understood until too late." "A point I return to?" I repeated. He hesitated, then nodded. "We all have days our lives circle around. Quiet days, ordinary days. Days that seem small until you look back and realize they split your life into before and after. For you, this is one of those days." The realization made my stomach drop, but I didn't even know Charles that well. He stepped closer, his voice barely above a murmur. "Sometimes it's not about how well you knew someone. It's about what version of yourself you meet in the moment they leave." His words were quiet, but they hit like truth. Not a truth I understood, but a truth he had carried. "I thought if I could reach Charles before the moment came," Silas continued, "the version of you that grows out of this day would shift, even a little, even enough to ease the years ahead." There it was again, that heartbreak in his voice when he talked about my future. "Why do you care so much about the person I become?" I asked. He closed his eyes as though the question hurt. "Because the person you become matters to more people than you realize. Because you spend your life trying to save others. And because the day you tried to save me, you didn't walk away the same." The cold air pressed into my lungs. "I tried to save you?" He nodded once, eyes shining. "Long after today. Long after the world feels smaller than it is for you now." "And did I save you?" I asked. Silas looked at me with a depth of longing that made my throat tighten. "You tried," he whispered. "You always try. That's who you are. It's why I came. It's why I shouldn't have come." "Why shouldn't you?" Silas's voice fractured softly. "Because I'm already standing too close to the moment that shapes you, and I'm afraid that seeing me here, today, will change the part of you that was supposed to stay gentle." A subtle ache expanded through me. Fear, confusion, compassion all braided together. "Silas," I said softly, but he looked away, shoulders trembling. "I'm not strong enough to watch you lose yourself again," he whispered. The wind moved through the bare branches above us, scattering thin flakes of snow across the ground. And in that fragile pause, I finally understood something he had been circling around since the moment we met. Silas hadn't come here just to stop a moment. He had come here trying, desperately, to protect the version of me he once knew. The version he feared this day would begin to unravel. Silas took a slow step back, as though putting even a few inches between us might prevent some unseen thread from tightening further. His eyes drifted to the distant road again, the one that wound down toward the center of town. There was nothing unusual about it, just asphalt, slush, and quiet winter stillness. Yet he stared at it like it held the memory of something neither of us could see. "I shouldn't have said that," he whispered. "I always say too much when I'm near you. It's why I promised myself I wouldn't be again." You keep talking like we're connected, I said. Like there's a version of us out there that I don't remember. There is, he murmured. But the way you meet that version of me, it matters. And this, he gestured weakly between us, wasn't it? Then what was supposed to happen instead? Silas rubbed a hand over his face, exhausted. You were supposed to walk away this morning. You were supposed to go home, make lunch, sit by the window the way you always do when you're trying to make peace with something. You weren't supposed to notice me. Not today. And that would have protected me? I asked. He nodded, eyes downcast. You were supposed to feel sadness for Charles. Nothing more. Nothing that tied you to me. That's what I wanted. To be a ghost in your morning. Not a shape you had to confront. A strange ache filled my chest. But you came here. You stood in the back of the funeral. You didn't hide. How could I not notice you? His voice cracked. Because in the timeline I tried to preserve, you didn't. I felt the world tilt a little, the quiet air tightening around us. Silas, how many times have you lived through today? He didn't answer at first. His jaw trembled, and when he finally spoke, it was with a softness that felt almost unbearable. Enough to know this version hurts the most. A cold ripple spread through me. Because I talked to you? He looked up, eyes glistening. Because you cared enough to ask. I didn't know what to say. The silence between us grew heavier, like snow piling slowly on branches until they start to bend. Silas took another step back, boots crunching softly in the thin layer of frost. If I stay longer, I'll pull you further into the part of your life you're not ready for. And I can't do that to you. Not again. What do you mean, again? He swallowed hard, his breath shaking. The first time I told you what I was, you believed me, and it changed you, more than I ever meant it to. So you're afraid of repeating that? I asked. I'm afraid of breaking you earlier than you're meant to break, he said. And I'm afraid of how much of myself I give away when you look at me like you do now. I blinked. Like I do now. Like you trust me, he whispered. Like you see something in me you shouldn't see yet. A painful silence lingered between us. The wind tugged at his coat, and for a moment he looked like a man caught between two opposing currents. The desire to reach toward something familiar and the fear of dragging it into danger. How do we know each other later? I asked softly. He closed his eyes, as if the question pierced him. Through a door you're not ready to open. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I'm allowed to give. I stepped closer before I could stop myself. Silas, if you're so afraid of what knowing you does to me, why come back at all? He let out a trembling exhale. Because in every version I've lived, I still try. I still hope I can change the small things. I still hope I can do something right. And today, saving Charles felt like something right. But you didn't save him. I know. He looked down at his hands as though they held years of failure. And now I've made things worse. What did you make worse? I asked gently. Silas lifted his eyes, and the answer was already written there, in sorrow, in memory, in something that looked like devotion. I let you see me, he whispered. And once you see me, you never quite turn away again. Not in any version. My breath caught, and for a moment neither of us moved. The snow fell more steadily now, quiet, soft, collecting on the edge of his shoulders. And I realized something frightening in its simplicity. Silas wasn't just here because of Charles. He was here because of me. Because in some future neither of us could touch yet. Our lives had collided in a way that left him both longing and afraid. Silas looked like he wanted to turn away, like the road behind him was calling him back to whatever year he belonged to. But something kept him there. Maybe duty, maybe regret, maybe the faint thread between us that neither of us truly understood. You're not supposed to be part of this, he murmured, voice frayed. You weren't meant to carry the weight of what I know, and yet I am, I said quietly. He gave a small, broken laugh. That's the problem. You always step toward the weight, not away from it. Even in the future, when you should walk the other direction, you don't. His eyes drifted over my face as if trying to memorize this earlier, unscarred version of me. I used to admire that about you. Then I learned how much it cost you. I felt something inside me twist. Not fear exactly, but a deep, sober ache, like hearing someone describe a loss you haven't lived yet. Silas, I said, choosing my words carefully, you're not protecting me right now. You're breaking me in a different way. by giving me just enough to fear but not enough to understand. I know, he whispered, shame flickering across his face. I know I'm doing this wrong. Every version of today, I try to speak less, to say almost nothing, to be a shadow in the corner of a memory. But the moment you look at me, it all slips. Why does it slip? Because you've looked at me like that before, he said. In another life, in another year, maybe in another version of yourself. And every time I forget that you haven't lived it yet. His voice cracked and he turned away as though hiding the tremor in his expression. Snow gathered lightly in his hair, on the shoulders of his coat, melting slowly against the heat of a body trying so hard not to collapse. You said I tried to save you, I said gently. What happened? His answer was immediate, instinctive. No. He faced me again, voice trembling. No, Andrew. That's not a moment you can carry yet. Yet, I repeated. You keep using that word. Because time isn't a line, he said, raising a hand slightly, then letting it fall. Not the way people think. It's more like a circle drawn too quickly. Some parts smear, some overlap, some pull you back whether you're ready or not. And which part are we in now? Silas hesitated. The part I always hoped you'd forget. The words stung in a way I couldn't fully explain. Why would you want me to forget anything about us? His eyes filled with that same impossible grief. Because remembering hurts you, and knowing hurts you sooner. The wind brushed between us, curling cold air around my legs. A distant crow called from the tree line, breaking the silence for a moment before the world settled still again. Silas's breath shook as he spoke. I told myself I'd only come back far enough to help Charles, that I'd stay out of your path, that you'd walk through this day untouched by me. But why does it matter if I'm touched by you? I asked. He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was thin. Because once you start asking who I am to you, you change. And everything that follows changes with you. But isn't that true for anyone we meet? I countered. Not like this, he whispered. Not when someone isn't supposed to enter your life yet. He took a slow breath, then added, and not when leaving your life becomes the moment that defines mine. I felt the air leave my chest in a quiet exhale. Leaving my life? He closed his eyes tightly as though the very thought burned. Not today, he said. Not this year. Not for a long time. But when it happens, it breaks something in both of us. More in you than in me. Silas looked toward the chapel again, jaw trembling. I came today believing I could save Charles and disappear before you noticed me. I wanted to leave your life before it ever began. But you didn't, I said. No, he breathed. I never do, no matter how many times I try. Another quiet fell between us, thick and cold. Snowflakes drifted gently around us, soft against the dark fabric of his coat. Tell me one thing, I said softly. He lifted his eyes. After everything that happened between us, whatever it was, did you ever regret knowing me? A long silence. Then his answer came quietly, fragile as falling snow. No, Silas whispered. Knowing you was the one thing I never tried to change. And for the first time, I felt it fully. The quiet, devastating truth behind his sorrow. Silas wasn't trying to rewrite a stranger's story. He was trying to save pieces of a connection he had already lived and already lost. Silas didn't speak again right away. He stayed there in the quiet morning light, snow settling around him like a thin veil, his breath uneven and shallow. It struck me how fragile he looked, fragile not in body, but in the way someone looks when they've carried too many versions of the same sorrow. I stepped closer, slow and careful, as if approaching someone half-broken. Silas, if knowing me meant so much to you, why would you want to erase today? Why avoid the moment we meet? His eyes, already red-rimmed, flickered with something soft and mournful. Because the first moment matters, Andrew. The tone of it echoes through everything that follows. And today, this moment, wasn't the one I wanted for you. But why? I asked. What difference does it make how we meet? Silas shook his head with a weary smile, one that held no joy, only memory. Because the version of you I knew, the one from the time I come from, he met me on a day when he was already carrying enough weight to understand what I was, and enough strength to survive hearing it. I felt my chest tighten, as though my body recognized something before my mind did. And I'm not strong enough now? That's not it, he said quickly. You're gentle now, untouched. Your grief is small, manageable. I didn't want to be the person who changes that. But you keep saying I change later, I said, that I become someone different. Silas looked at me with the kind of sorrow usually reserved for funerals. We all become different. But you tried to hold every broken thing together, even when it wasn't yours to fix. I swallowed hard. Something in his voice felt as if he were describing a version of me shaped by losses I hadn't yet lived. Silas, I said quietly, if you came back only for Charles, why does it feel like so much of this is about me? He let out a long, trembling breath. Because time isn't clean, Andrew. You can't pull one thread without others coming loose. I thought I could isolate this day, arrive before the moment, help Charles, slip away. I didn't want to touch anything else. But you did. He nodded. You saw me. You spoke to me. And your voice. God, your voice. He looked down, shaking his head as though trying to steady himself. I wasn't prepared for how much it would affect me. The admission hit me in a way I didn't expect. The cold around us felt sharper, the air more fragile. What do you mean? I asked. When you've already lived through years where someone's presence shaped you, he murmured. Seeing them again before they've lived those years, it does something to you. It breaks you in small, quiet ways. I felt heat rising in my chest despite the cold. And what do I become to you? In the life you remember? Silas hesitated, but his silence said enough. The answer was written in the grief on his face. I was someone who mattered to him deeply. Someone he missed. Someone he lost. And he didn't want the earliest version of me, this unweathered, unscarred version, to know that. He turned slightly, looking toward the road. But he didn't move. I shouldn't stay, he said softly. Every minute I remain here risks shifting more than I can fix. Then why don't you leave? I asked. He closed his eyes. Because leaving you twice in one life is harder than I imagined. The words nearly knocked the breath from me. Twice? He didn't explain. Instead, he tightened his coat and stepped back toward the tree line where the shade made the snow look blue. I came today thinking I could save something small, he whispered. Something contained. I thought I could change just one detail and slip away unnoticed, but that isn't what happened. No, he said, voice raw. Instead, I found you again. Too early, too open, too unguarded. His gaze softened, heavy with familiarity he had no right to have. And now all I can think about is the day you looked at me for the last time, the day you knew too much. A shiver moved through me, not from cold, but from a sense of gravity, as if the future had leaned in close enough to whisper something I wasn't ready to hear. Silas, I said, voice unsteady, tell me the truth. Were you trying to protect Charles today? Or were you trying to protect me from the person you know I become? Silas's lips parted, but no words came. Not at first. Then, in a trembling whisper, I was trying to protect you from the day you meet me. The snow fell more steadily now, gathering in the quiet between us. And for the first time I understood. Silas wasn't just afraid of what I might learn. He was afraid of how much I would care. Silas's confession lingered in the cold air, more chilling than the winter wind. I felt it settle into me, heavy and impossible to ignore. He wasn't talking like a man who had stumbled into my life. He was talking like someone who had lived inside it once, long enough to mourn its shadows. I don't understand, I said softly. Why would meeting you hurt me? Silas lowered his gaze, his breath trembling in the air between us. Because the moment you see me for who I am, your life divides, before and after, and I've carried the after. I didn't want you to feel it so soon. You talk like knowing you is dangerous. No, he murmured, not dangerous, just costly. He looked at me again, and something flickered in his eyes, an apology shaped by years I hadn't lived. I didn't want this version of you, he continued, the one still whole in ways you don't notice, to carry scars meant for later. You keep talking like I'm fragile, I said. Silas shook his head, a faint, sad smile crossing his face. No, Andrew, you're one of the strongest people I've met, but strength doesn't mean you should bleed early. The words hit something inside me, something I didn't have a name for, a quiet fear mixed with an unexpected tenderness. What happens between us? I asked, trying to steady my voice. In the future, you remember? Silas closed his eyes, as if the memory hurt him. We meet because of someone else. Not today. Not like this. You're older. You've lost more. You see things differently. And when I finally tell you what I am, you believe me. Completely. You walk with me into something you should have run from. My pulse quickened. Why would I do that? He hesitated. Because you care. Because you always try to help anyone standing alone. And because you saw something in me you couldn't ignore. He swallowed hard. But the thing you saw, it cost you more than it should have. I felt my chest tighten. Then let me ask you something. If our connection causes so much pain, why are you here today? Why risk it? Silas looked at me with an expression I couldn't name, a mix of longing, sorrow, and something close to devotion. Because even after everything, even after the days I wish I could rewrite, I still couldn't stand the thought of you carrying the version of this morning I lived through alone. My breath caught. There was a tenderness in his voice that didn't belong to two strangers in a church parking lot. So you came back, I said quietly, for Charles, but also for me. Silas tried to smile, but it broke halfway. I came because there are threads in your life you don't see yet. Threads that pull forward into years where you and I cross paths at the wrong time, in the wrong way. And today is the first knot in that rope. I felt a shiver run down my spine. And you thought undoing this knot would protect me? He nodded, eyes shining. I thought if I could change one thing, just one, maybe your life would lean a little differently. Maybe you wouldn't carry certain burdens. Maybe we wouldn't meet the way we did. But I was wrong. Wrong how? Because I misjudged time, he whispered. I thought I could slip in just before the moment and fix something small. But time isn't a machine. It reacts. And today, it reacted too fast. I exhaled slowly. You mean because I saw you? Silas nodded. Because you saw me. Because you spoke to me. Because you said my name before you were ever supposed to know it. He stepped closer without meaning to, drawn in by some unspoken gravity. You weren't meant to recognize me yet, he said, voice trembling. Not in this life, not in this moment. And when you did, I realized everything I was trying to fix had already shifted. He lifted a hand but stopped before touching me, the air trembling between our hands. I didn't want to be part of your story yet, he whispered. Not today. Not like this. Not when I know the weight you eventually carry because of me. Then tell me the truth, I said, my voice barely above the hush of the wind. What am I meant to carry? Silas's eyes softened with unbearable sorrow. The knowledge, he said slowly, that sometimes you save someone and lose a piece of yourself in the process. A fragile silence settled around us. And I'm trying, he whispered, to keep you whole a little longer. The world felt as still as the falling snow. Silas wasn't just afraid of the future. He was afraid of being the reason I broke. Silas's voice faded into the cold air, and for a moment, all I could hear was the faint whisper of wind through the bare branches above us. Snowflakes drifted lazily between us, landing on his shoulders, melting slowly against the warmth of a man who seemed anything but warm inside. You're talking like I become someone unrecognizable, I said quietly. Silas shook his head slowly. No, you become someone extraordinary. Someone who tries to hold the world together even when it's falling apart around you. He drew a trembling breath. But the cost of that, the cost is what I tried to spare you. And you think meeting you does that? Changes me? Not just meeting me, he said. Caring about me. His eyes lowered. Caring changes everything. For both of us. The honesty in that sentence felt too heavy, too intimate. Like something spoken between people with years of history rather than the minutes we'd shared. But those minutes weren't equal. Not for him. Not for whatever version of me he carried. What happens between us in your time? I asked. Silas's expression tightened. Not with anger, but with a sorrow so delicate it looked like it could shatter if I spoke too loudly. I can't tell you. Because once you know, you start moving toward it, without even realizing it. You start looking for signs, for moments, and the more you look, the faster you fall into the path I was trying to change. His hands curled slightly, as though holding something invisible. I've watched too many versions of you walk into pain you weren't meant to learn so young. Pain from what? I asked. He hesitated. From loving someone whose life doesn't run in one direction. I felt the ground tilt beneath me, just enough to steal my breath. Are you saying I loved you? Silas didn't answer. His silence said more than words ever could. His jaw trembled, and he shut his eyes again, as if the memory tasted both sweet and unbearable. Silas, I murmured, if you came back to protect me, Why are you still here? Why not walk away now? You've told me enough for me to be curious, confused, maybe even worried, but not enough to change my life yet. You could still leave before anything becomes fixed. A painful smile crossed his face. Small, brief, and breaking. Because I can't turn away from you twice in one lifetime, he said softly. The first time was hard enough. I felt my breath shake. The first time. In the version of your life I lived, he whispered. You were the one who walked toward me first. Not like today. Not here. But in another place. Another year. You saw something in me that no one else ever bothered to look for. And I wasn't strong enough to stay. My chest tightened. Why not? His answer came slowly, painfully. Because I didn't want to break the man you were becoming. And leaving you broke you anyway. He turned slightly away, shoulders curling inward. I thought leaving was the kindest thing. But kindness looks different when you're the one left behind. Silas wasn't just remembering grief. He was remembering guilt. And now you're here again, I said, trying to fix something. No, he said softly, trying to make sure the breaking happens later, when you're stronger, when you can survive it. Survive what? I whispered. He looked at me then, and in his eyes was something devastatingly tender, a recognition shaped by a life I hadn't lived yet. Survive knowing me, he said. The snow fell harder now, swirling gently around us, dimming the edges of the morning. Silas took a step back toward the road, his boots crunching softly in the slush. I shouldn't be here, he murmured. Everything I've said today risks shifting your path, and I promised myself I wouldn't do that again. I'm not supposed to mean anything to you yet. But you do, I said before I could stop myself. Silas froze. He turned toward me slowly, breath catching in his throat. His expression folded in on itself, a quiet collapse of restraint, longing, and fear. That, he whispered, is exactly what I was afraid of. He stepped back again, and again. Andrew, if I stay one more minute, you'll start to feel the thread between us, the one you're not supposed to feel until much later. And I can't let that happen again. Not this early. Not when I've already failed once today. Silas, I have to go, he said, voice breaking, before you start looking at me the way you will one day. Before it becomes too familiar. Before it becomes too hard for me to leave. He took another step, then another, and in the soft quiet of the falling snow, he said something so faint I almost missed it. Please, let me go while you still can. He turned away from me, slowly, reluctantly, as if each step cost him something he couldn't afford to lose. The snow swallowed the sound of his footsteps, and in that fragile silence, one truth settled deep inside me. Silas wasn't just trying to save the past, he was trying to save the man I had not yet become. I didn't follow Silas when he walked away. I told myself it was because the snow had picked up, or because the cold had finally settled into my bones, or because I still needed time to make sense of everything he'd said. But the truth was simpler than that. Some moments don't ask for action. They ask for stillness. They ask you to stand in the quiet and accept that the world is larger than the rules you've trusted all your life. I stayed there in the parking lot long after Silas disappeared down the narrow Vermont road. The chapel behind me had fallen silent, the candles no doubt flickering their last against the wooden pews. And somewhere inside, Charles rested in the kind of peace the living rarely understand. I wondered not for the first time if Silas had truly come to save him, or if Charles's last morning had been a thread in a larger pattern I wasn't meant to see yet. When I finally turned to leave, the world felt different in a way I couldn't quite name. Not frightening, not comforting, just wider, as though time itself had shifted slightly, making room for something I hadn't expected. I don't know when I'll see Silas again. I don't know which version of him will be standing in front of me, or which version of myself he'll remember when he does. But I know this much. Whatever paths our lives are tied to, whatever moments loop back on themselves, whatever truths wait farther down the line, today was the beginning of something I can't undo, and a small, quiet part of me isn't sure I want to.